I'm just a guy splaining stuff. Let's dive in. Hey folks, thanks for joining me in part 3 of Splain'n Compression. This time we're diving into vocals. And to my mind, this is the most important piece in the series because anytime there's a vocal in the mix, it's got to stand out as being the most important element. Let's face it, anytime we hear a human voice, we're going to have a natural tendency to hone in on that, so we got to make sure we get it right. And personally, even though I write, perform, and record my own songs, and as a matter of fact, I've even written an ebook on the subject, I'm enough self-aware to know that my vocal is not the best and my skill and ability is limited. So consequently, I'm always looking for opportunities to find ways to improve the result of my vocal recordings. You cannot fix a bad vocal in the mix, so you got to do your best to check off the boxes during the recording phase. Make sure that you're in a good environment. Make sure you're in good health. Make sure that you minimize the amount of noise in the room. Understand what the right microphone is for the situation. Understand the right microphone placement. These are all things we can do up front to capture the best vocal we can to try to get it right at the source. Now, hopefully, over the course of this video, I hope to demonstrate some of the tools available, how to control those tools, and how you might deploy them in your own vocal tracking or mixing situations. And once again, I have to ask you all to look at this video not as a tutorial on how to apply compression to your own vocals, rather as a demonstration of the tools, how they work, how they can be controlled, and what results you might be able to get by manipulating these tools and using them to your advantage. So, as we move forward, we're going to be looking at several ways to manage dynamics because, after all, a compressor's primary role is to reduce the loud parts. So, there are many ways we can reduce the loud parts without even ever using a compressor. Hey, you might be able to do it on the way in if you had a talented recording engineer helping you. That person could simply ride the input gain up and down as they track your vocals, and as you went too loud, they could bring it down. As you went too low, they could make it louder. And that's the way they used to do it in the old ways. But I doubt you'll be doing that in the modern days. And also, that's a very tedious task. There are other ways or other tools you can use to manage the dynamics. You can use volume automation. Once you have the recording captured inside the DAW, you can use volume automation. You can use clip gain to surgically attack specific parts of the vocal. Additionally, you might use a compressor, but oftentimes, if all you want to do is reduce the peaks, a limiter may be a more appropriate tool to use to accomplish that. Also, you might be able to combine a compressor and a limiter. We talked about that in one of the previous series. And then something we should all be aware of is there are a number of different types of compressors. In the previous series, I talked about a FET, F-E-T compressor, known for being very fast, an LA2A, which is an optical compressor known for being slower and smoother. There are also other types of compressors, a VCA or a Verimu, which are often used on the mix bus or during the mastering process. We're not going to focus on those during this discussion. But we will, again, use what I'm going to call digital compressors, which are those that are found inside your DAW. either the stock compressor that comes with your DAW, in this case in Studio One, or an emulation of a hardware compressor which is reproduced digitally. So I'm using those because I think they're more readily available to those of you who might be watching this, and you might either have them if you're using Studio One or something comparable in your own DAW. As we begin the demonstrations, I'm going to do something I haven't done before, and that is I'm going to record a small live vocal piece. And the reason I'm doing that is because the song I'm using for all these demonstrations was previously recorded. And my typical behavior for my own songs when I record is to use compression on the way in during the tracking process. And that's what I did with this particular song. And consequently, the compression is baked into the vocal track, and then it'll limit my ability to demonstrate how the compression works if it already has it on it. So lucky you. You get to listen or watch me record a little vocal piece, and then we will use that piece throughout the video to demonstrate the various tools and techniques. Remember, I'm no expert. I'm just a guy splaining stuff. Loving you is a gamble, and I take my chances. Loving you could be my jackpot, or I could lose it all. Okay, now that we've got something to work with, let's solo this to see what we can hear. Loving you is a gamble, and I take my chances. Loving you could be my jackpot, or I could lose it all. What did you hear? Did you hear my foot tapping? Did you hear the big breaths before each phrase? Were some phrases too loud? Maybe you want to go back and give it a listen with a critical ear. Did you hear what I heard? Maybe you heard more that needs to be cleaned up. Well, as I said, I'm not the best vocalist, and that was kind of a sloppy take, but it does give us something to work with. And it's obvious that some of those foot taps and breaths and other things need to be cleaned up. And you might ask, well, that's called editing. Why are we talking about editing in a video about dynamics and compression? Well, remember, if we apply compression to this track and then ultimately apply some makeup gain, what's going to happen is all those low-level sounds like the foot tapping and the deep breaths are going to come up in the mix, and they'll be much more prominent, and then we'll be able to hear that through the mix. Those little foot taps could end up sounding like somebody putting a new roof on your house. So we're going to go into Studio One. We're going to use their edit tool. I'm going to select all these parts in between the phrases, and I'm just going to mute them. Then I'll bounce that track, and I'll duplicate it multiple times so we can use it through the rest of this video so we can demonstrate all of the tools and techniques. Well, now that we have a clean piece of audio to work with, we need to ask ourselves, what should we do with it, if anything? Should we apply any techniques, any tools to improve or change the dynamics? And typically, what we might want to do is eliminate clipping. We may want to level off the dynamics, or we may want to use a compressor to somehow change the character of the sound. Well, on this piece of audio, we don't have any clipping, so let's put that aside for the moment. And let's talk about using dynamic control to level off the sound. And that begs the question, why is there often such an obsession about leveling the sound on anything? I mean, after all, don't we like things to be going up and down? Doesn't that make it more interesting? And to some degree, that is true. However, I think particularly when it comes to vocals, leveling is very important because human beings hear sound at a perceived level. What does that mean? There may be high parts, low parts, but our ears perceive the volume at a constant average level. So it's important, if we want to make something more prominent in a mix, like a vocal, it's important that we try to level that sound off so it is a constant, a relatively constant level throughout the song. And as the rest of the parts go up and down, instruments come in, instruments go out, drum beats happen, all that stuff is happening, the vocal is sitting constantly throughout that. And what happens? It makes it easier to hear. It makes it clearer. We can understand the words, and we can appreciate the vocal in the mix. Now, at this juncture, I suspect all of us understand the concept of dynamic range, and that's the difference between the quietest parts and the loudest parts, right? Makes sense. But did you know that mastering engineers also use another measurement, and that's called the crest factor? What is that? Well, the crest factor looks at the difference between the average volume and the peaks. That's really starting to focus in on the important things that help human beings perceive the sound in a certain way. So, as we proceed with managing the dynamics, anytime we compress or do anything to reduce the dynamic range, we risk the possibility of overdoing it, getting to the point where there's very little dynamic range, and that really sucks the life out of any audio, whether it's an instrument or a vocal. And we want to try to avoid that. So as we move forward, in the next section, we'll be doing some demonstrations of managing the volume and these dynamic ranges. And then we'll come back a little later on after that, and we'll talk about the last piece, and that is we'll discuss and demonstrate how we can use a compressor to change the character of a sound. So let's get into the dynamics right now. Here we are. Here's the piece of audio we're working with. And recall, the first thing we did is went and got rid of all the junk in these spaces between the phrases. Remember when we edited that out? But now we have a lot of these big peaks here. It's not very level. So we want to get rid of these big peaks wherever they exist and try to level this audio out. We'll go and use the tool called the gain envelope. And now we can surgically change the gain or the volume on the pieces that are just too loud. That looks good. This one's really big. Let's pull that down. Wait a minute, I think we might need to pull that down a little more. That's it. Now what we're going to do, we're done with that. We're pretty level. Let's bounce this piece. There it is. Let's see what it looks like. Here's the before and the after. And now we can see that we no longer have a big difference between the average and the peaks. And earlier on, we got rid of all the junk in the middle. Let's see what it sounds like. Okay, let's listen in the mix. Here's the original with the peaks.
Could be my jackpot.
Keep your eye on this level meter here, where it's peaking.
I could lose it all.
Now let's listen to the one that we reduced the peaks.
Loving you is a gamble.
Sounds kind of smooth.
And
But look at where it's peaking now. It's considerably lower.
Take my chances.
So
Loving you.
what happens now if we put the mix back in?
Be my jackpot.
It's lost in the mix. Not enough volume.
Or I could lose it all.
So we're going to play it again. And what can we do about it? Just like when we use compression and we apply makeup gain, look, we'll boost the gain.
Is a gamble. And I take.
Now look at the peaks.
I take my chances. Loving you could be my
Better or
jackpot.
worse? You decide. But I think we accomplished our goal. There it is.
I could lose it all.
We could try something different, like riding the fader manually or volume automation. Well, actually, I'm not a big fan of volume automation. I find it a little hard to manipulate, but it does work. However, we can automate the automation with something like a Vocal Rider plugin. Let's see how it works.
Loving you.
You set the range. You set a target
is a
volume.
Gamble.
And it does its thing.
And I take my chances.
So let's go back and visit and see exactly what it is that this thing is doing. First of all, we can see these yellow lines where it drew the automation, and we can see that it's boosting a bit where the volume is down and cutting where the volume is too high. You can see when the volume starts to come down, it boosts it a little bit. And of course, where we have a high peak, it's cutting it a bit. After the fact, you can go in and grab any one of these points and manipulate it the way you prefer to allow you to fine-tune what this thing has already done. So, if you find that setting volume automation manually is difficult, this will give you a head start. So, from that aspect, I would say this is a pretty interesting tool. As I said, I don't particularly use it, but it might be useful. Going back to the plugin in itself, and although this isn't a compressor, in some ways it behaves like a compressor in that where you set this range can determine how loud things are allowed to get. So this thing right here, in some ways, could be looked at as a threshold, as is used in a compressor. And this lower range slider could be viewed as something called an upward compressor, where it increases the volume of the low parts instead of reducing the volume of the loud parts. So whenever a volume falls below the range you set, it will bring that volume up. Kind of interesting. And then, when all is said and done, you have the opportunity to go in and boost the output, which is like a compressor where you add makeup gain to the entire piece. So it's got a lot of controls, and there's nothing saying that you couldn't stack this with another compressor where you would use this first, and then if it didn't accomplish what you want, maybe overlay a compressor following this to further manipulate the dynamics. As I said, I don't use this. It is interesting, and I'm thinking it may have application if you're doing podcasts or voiceovers. I'm thinking that may be an interesting way to use this particular tool. So there's a little peek at another tool available to manipulate your dynamics. And now we'll move on and we'll try using a limiter. Okay, here we are. We're in the DAW and we're looking at a limiter. And our objective is we want to shave off some of these tall volume peaks so it sits a little nicer in the mix, a little more consistent. And possibly we want to increase the volume without clipping. So that's our objective. And if you saw the first in these series of Splain'n compression, you would have seen me talk about using a limiter on a mix to boost the volume up so we get it just as close to zero as we can, so our mix song is competitive. When we're talking about using a limiter with vocal, we don't want to get to zero. And I think setting the ceiling at around -6 is probably a more appropriate level. Where are we here? Let's get this around 6. So we're going to set our ceiling about 6. And if we want to bring up the volume of the vocal to sit better in the mix, let's bring the mix up a little more. So right now at that level, the vocal is a little buried in the mix. So we set the ceiling at 6, and we have 2 ways to bring the volume up on the vocal. We can use the gain and watch the level meter. We're up here meeting the threshold. Here we set, I shouldn't say threshold, I should say ceiling, meeting the ceiling. But the more we push that, the more we push the input gain on the vocal, the more distorted it becomes. So we don't want to do that. And you'll note we're getting a pretty good amount of compression here. Watch the yellow bar when we do that. That's not very pleasing. So we're going to bring the gain back down to 0. And we're going to try to bring the volume up on the vocal by using the threshold. And with this limiter, when we lower the threshold, it automatically raises the output gain. So it automatically introduces makeup gain. So as we lower the threshold, the automated makeup gain kicks in, and it gets louder and louder.
I take my chances. Loving you could be my jackpot.
So there we are. Pretty simple. We set the ceiling at 6, which is our target where we want this vocal to sit in the mix.
Lose it all.
And then we brought up the volume by lowering, bringing the threshold lower and lower. And by bringing the threshold lower, the limiter is automatically adding makeup gain. So it gets louder.
And I take,
That's it.
I take my chance.
I don't think we need to do anything else.
Loving you could be my jackpot.
Simple. Mission accomplished. Now for something double good. This is going to be fun. Remember when I talked about this? It's my analog dual compressor unit. It looks like this on YouTube. I've got a video on it. And I use this serial compression, my favorite compression technique, on all my vocals with this unit that sends the FET compressor into the optical compressor. And now we're going to try to do it in the DAW. So the first question we have to ask is, what's our objective? What are we trying to do? Well, it remains the same as previous exercises. We want to level out or smooth the vocal track. And why use two compressors? To share the load and utilize the strength of each of them. Just like when you're woodworking, to get a smooth finish, the first thing you do is you use the rough sandpaper to get out the big imperfections. Then you use the less aggressive paper to smooth it out. The FET takes off the big sharp edges, just like that. And then the optical compressor smooths it all out, just like this. That's what we're trying to do, get it smooth. So let's look at some of the controls before we proceed. First, we need set a threshold. On the FET compressor, it's set internally as the input increases, but it's also affected by the ratio setting. On the optical, it's fixed internally, no external controls. The ratio is set here manually. We have several to choose from. And on the optical, we have no ratio. We select the peak reduction. And the attack and release are set manual on the FET compressor, and it's very fast. And on the optical, that's fixed internally. Makeup gain, we adjust the output to adjust the makeup gain. And on the optical, we adjust something called the gain. I think it's worth noting that the optical compressor is actually very easy to use. It only really has two controls. But oftentimes, people misinterpret the knob called gain as an input factor. It is not. What you do to operate the optical compressor is first, you set your peak reduction. When you get that right, then you adjust the gain to adjust the output level or the makeup gain coming out of the compressor. For this demo, I created two presets, one each. For the FET, ratio 4:1, rather moderate. Attack and release are fast to catch those early peaks. The input gain to get about 4 dB reduction, and output to match the input. It's what we always want to do. For the opto, we adjust the peak reduction to get about -4 dB on the meter. And then we adjust the output gain to match the input again. That's it. Hey folks, thanks for watching so far. You know, it's taken me decades to accumulate the knowledge that I'm sharing with you in this Splain'n Stuff video series, and I hope you're enjoying it or at least getting something out of it. And I would greatly appreciate it if you would take the time to please subscribe, check the like button if you do like it, ring the bell to be notified for the next video, and if you really enjoy what you're getting, you can always look for the link below and buy me a coffee. Thanks again. On with the show. It's time to do some listening. Here's what we're going to do. I've applied the presets to each of the compressors, and I'm going to let you hear 3 versions. The uncompressed, I'm going to compare that to the FET style compression and the serial compression where we take the FET into the optical. Listen carefully. They've all been level matched. Can you hear the difference? Which is better? Let me know in the comments.
Loving you could be my jackpot, or I I could lose it all. Loving you is a gamble, and I take my chances. Loving you could be my jackpot, or I could lose it all. Loving you is a gamble, and I take my chances. Loving you could be my jackpot, or I could lose it all. Loving you is a gamble, and I take my chances. Loving you could be my jackpot, or I could lose it all. Loving you is a gamble, and I take my chances. Loving you could be my jackpot, or I could lose it all. Loving you is a gamble.
Okay, then that's a wrap on the leveling demo. Now we're going to take a quick look at changing the character of a sound using a compressor. Let's see how we do that. We're going to change it up a little bit, and we're going to use 2 new songs, hooray, and 2 new objectives to make it either punchy or aggressive. Here we go. Okay, folks, here we are. We're in the DAW. The song is playing in the background. Let me orient you to the tools and the visuals and what we're doing. On the left, we see the usual level meters. This one is the original vocal, no compression. This one is the compressed vocal. When all is said and done, we want to have those level matched. We're going to use the stock compressor inside Studio One. And I'm also going to be using this other visual tool, which I'll bring up in a little while so we can see on an overlay basis what's happening with the compression from a visual standpoint. Okay, so let me bring up the volume a little bit on the track.
Got the locks closed tight, and you're messing with my mind.
I'm going to engage this compressor.
Like a bomb, boy, baby.
Our objective here is to make this a little more punchy, a little more aggressive.
I'm entwined.
So turn it off, see if you hear the difference.
Every time I step out,
Back on.
you pull me right back in.
listen
like a
for the
barbed wire,
consonants at the
baby.
beginning of the phrases.
You're ripping up my skin. Oh, I'm all scraped up. Don't ask me where I've been. Where I've been. Ha! Take it away, boys.
Now, hopefully you can hear that.
Closed tight, and you're messing with my mind.
Turn it off again.
Like a barbed wire, baby, got me all entwined. I'm entwined.
We've got this threshold here, so we're just getting a couple dBs of reduction at minus 18. We've got a very mild ratio at only 1.8.
You're ripping up my skin.
And we've got a sharp knee. We've got a pretty slow attack at 64 milliseconds and a slow release. The reason we have a slow attack is we do not want to catch those early peaks. We want to let them through. So we set it slow so the big transients get through before we do anything to them. And then likewise, we're setting a slow release. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit. Now we'll bring up the visual. The blue is with no compression. Anything pink is with compression.
You're ripping up my skin.
So you can see there's considerably more pink popping up behind the blue, indicating this is getting more aggressive.
Take it away, boys.
I'll turn it off and you'll see that those should be pretty close to each other with not much happening. I turn it back on, you see much more pink. That's after compression. And look at the level meter. We're pretty well level matched. Now we're going to do something else. One more layer of trying to enhance this. I'm going to engage this filter.
You pull me right back in.
And I've set this filter at just shy of 1,000 hertz. And what we're trying to do here is I'm telling the compressor, don't compress any of the high stuff above this level. So listen to the effect that this has when I turn this on and off.
Got the locks closed tight, and you're messing with my mind.
Now watch when I turn the filter on, you should hear it pop a little more.
Like a barbed wire, baby, got me all entwined. I'm entwined. Every
turn the filter off.
You pull me right back in.
And look at the visual here. When I put the filter on, you'll see more pink. Right now you see more blue. I'll hit the filter.
Don't ask me where I've
Blue is pushed to the back and we've got more of the compressed signal coming through. So I'll leave the filter on. One more time, I'll turn the whole compressor on and off.
And you're messing with my mind. Like a barbed wire, baby, got me all entwined.
Hopefully you can hear the difference. On, off.
Every time I step out, you pull me right back in. Like a barbed wire,
like I said, listen for the consonants.
You're ripping up my skin.
Off.
Oh, I'm all scraped up. Don't ask me where I've been. Where I've been.
Okay. I think we accomplished our goal. To me, that sounds more aggressive and punchy. Hope you could hear that. We'll move on to the next exercise. Okay, here we go. We've got a new song, a new exercise, and we're going to try a couple different techniques as well. So, in the background, you can hear the song. It's another one of my songs. It's a little bit more of a hip-hop style. And our objective here is to make this vocal a little more punchy and aggressive. I think that'll fit the genre of this particular song. So that's our objective. Aggressive, punchy. I'm going to call it aggressive. Let me orient you to the screen. We've got the usual layout here. We've got 2 level meters on the left. This is the before vocal with no compression. On the right, this is the meter indicating the volume after compression, and our objective is always to level match, and we'll touch on that as we move forward. We're using the standard stock compressor from Studio One, and we'll be introducing a couple other visual tools to help us as we proceed. So I'm going to bring the volume up on this a little bit. You can hear what it sounds like. Just got a little clip on a loop.
Used to have a car and I got jacked. 2 little kids put a gun to my back. Took all my stuff. Never get it back, never get it back, never get it back.
Okay, so I think you get the gist of it. That's the song. We're going to engage the compressor, and I'll walk you through some of the settings and why I've chosen these settings. We've got a very low threshold, and we're attempting to achieve just a few dB of compression. You can see that here. We have a very moderate ratio. We're not doing much compression at all. And we have a sharp knee. Next, let's talk about the attack and release. Generally speaking, when we want to get punchy or aggressive, we want to set the attack at a slow attack time. Why? Because we want the transient, that initial transient in the vocal to get through without any compression, thus making it a little more aggressive. So we set it slow. And then the release time, we generally want to set that slow as well. However, this time we're going to do it a little differently, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here's a delay time calculator from Lion's Den delay time calculator. I'll have the link to this in the notes. And I'm using this to help time the release to the beats per minute. The song is at 90 beats per minute. I put that in. And for this exercise, we're just going to use a whole note. And what they call normal is 2666.67 milliseconds. 2666.67 milliseconds. That's if we want to time the release to a 90 beat per minute song. That's what we're doing. So you can see that's what I've said here, and that's why I said it. We're trying to time the release to the beats of the song. So let me bring the song up a little bit again.
Used to have a car and I got jacked. 2 little kids put a gun to my back. Took all my stuff.
Let me turn the compressor off. See if you hear a difference.
Never get it back.
Off. On. Off.
Used to have a car and I got jacked. 2 little kids put a gun to my back. Took all my stuff. Never get it back, never get it back, never get it back.
Now, I've been finding that using these filters work some magic. So we're going to deploy some filters on this and see if you hear any difference.
Put a gun to my back. Took all my stuff. Never get it back. Never get it back. Never get it back.
Turn it back on.
Old damn place like auto show. Used to have a car and I got jacked. Two little kids put a gun to my back. Took all my stuff. Never get it back. Never get it back. Never get it back.
To my ear, that really makes it a little more punchy. Why did I choose these settings? Well, this was all done by ear. I listened to the track, listened to the vocal, dialed the low cut in until it sounded right to me to get the tone that I wanted on the low end. And a reminder again how this works. Let me draw the volume down a little bit. Here's how this works. This is currently set at 300 hertz. What does that mean? The compressor is not using anything below 300 hertz to trigger the compression. So it's letting the low end through. Here on the high end, anything that's above 3.3 kilohertz will not be used to trigger the compression. So it's letting the high end through and letting the low end through, essentially using the mids to trigger the compression. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring up the spectrometer just so we can see what we're talking about here. This is set at 300 hertz. That's way over here. So anything below this point is not being listened to trigger the compression. And then on the high-end filter, we've set it at 3.3 kilohertz, which is way up here. So all this up here is not being used to trigger it. Everything down here is not triggering the compressor. Essentially, all we're doing is using the compressor to be triggered by the mid-range only. And that's the effect. Let's turn it on and off. Turn it on.
Used to have a car and I got jacked. Two little kids put a gun to my back. Took all my stuff. Never get it back. Never get it back. Never get it back.
Let it go through one more time.
I don't know.
Filter off.
Place like auto show. Used to have a car and I got jacked. Two little kids put a gun to my back. Took all my stuff. Never get it back, never get it back, never get it back. Is it going? I don't know. Old damn place like auto show.
Turn the whole thing off with the filters and everything.
Used to have a car and I got jacked. Two little kids put a gun to my back.
Now everything
Took
out.
all my stuff. Never get it back, never get it back, never get it back.
Okay, now we've looked at this visual once before. We'll look at it again with this exercise. Blue is before compression, pink is after. If I turn this off,
Two little kids put a gun to my back.
I turn this off, the pink and the blue overlaying each other are almost identical. And when I turn the compressor on with the filters, you'll see that the blue will fade back and we'll get more pink, indicating we're getting more aggressive, more volume when we see more pink.
Took all my stuff, never get it back, never get it back, never get it back.
Turn it up a little bit.
I don't know. Old damn place like auto show. Used to have a car and I got jacked. Two little kids put a gun to my back. Took all my stuff, never get it back, never get it back, never get it back.
Well, I don't think there's anything else we need to do here. I think we could try a couple other different settings based upon this calculator, but I'll put this calculator link in the notes, and you can play with that yourself if you want to try some of these techniques on your own song.
I don't know. Old and place like the show. Used to have a car and it got jacked.
So that concludes Splain'n and Compression on vocals. Hope you got something out of it. Thanks for dropping in. Don't forget to subscribe. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye for now.